So everybody understands the difference between potential and total or absolute evolutionary fitness. Darwin called this natural selection, implying that nature itself is the selecting agent. Generally, a mutation is going to have three possible outcomes. Outcome number one is negative, bad. And the vast majority of mutations are actually negative. They do not enhance your survival. They are far more likely to kill you. Is everybody clear on that? We've talked about some of these when we talked about malfunctions in meiosis and mitosis and odd chromosome numbers. But even a simple change of one letter of the DNA alphabet can be enough to kill a functional protein. And if the protein has no function or reduced function, it will almost always be a bad thing for the organism in question. Is everybody clear on that? Those get eliminated almost immediately. So you may want to get that down. They get eliminated from the allele pool or gene pool almost immediately. The second type of outcome is neutral, a neutral mutation. This is one that typically has no effect whatsoever on the organism. It doesn't help it, it doesn't hinder it, it doesn't affect it in any way. Natural selection is neutral towards these. It does not increase their frequency, it does not decrease their frequency. It has no effect. And surprisingly enough, these are the most common ones that are observed. Why? Because negative mutations are eliminated so quickly, you just don't see them. A lot of miscarriages in humans are caused by negative mutations. It's just so quick, it's gone before it even happens. That's what it seems like. Is everybody clear on that? The only reason the neutrals get seen is because it gives you something to compare to others. It has no effect. The last outcome is a positive or beneficial mutation. A positive or beneficial mutation. These are extraordinarily rare. The chances of these are so rare that we don't really calculate them. When they arise, the simple fact that they confer an advantage means that they go to fixation very quickly. They go to fixation or a frequency of 100% within the population very, very quickly. I believe we talked about lactose tolerance in humans, didn't we? That's a perfect example of a beneficial mutation. So even though it is the mutant phenotype, most humans actually share it now because it gives us an advantage. Doesn't mean being lactose intolerant is necessarily a disadvantage. It's just that the other is an advantage. Does everybody see how that works? This is called a selective sweep. A selective sweep, meaning it goes through the population so fast that it becomes fixed in a very short period of time. Yes, ma'am.
Is that for the positive outcome? Is that for the beneficial outcome?
Yes. You get the advantage, it makes such a big difference, everybody ends up with it. A selective sweep. It sweeps through the population, sweeping it to fixation. Is that clear enough? Yes, ma'am.
How is lactose intolerance a benefit? How is lactose intolerance a positive?
It's not.
Oh,
Lactose tolerance is positive because it allows you to successfully digest the sugar lactose, which is present in milk, which means if you're lactose tolerant, you have access to a food source that other people don't.
Okay, sounded like you said intolerance was positive.
No, intolerance is the norm, or it used to be. Most people are now lactose tolerant because it's such an advantage for humans because we have livestock. Everybody clear on that? Good question, by the way. Thank you. Any other questions? So, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so like when people get bit by a tick and they can't eat certain meat, does that become like a mutation or is it different?
That is an allergy.
Okay.
What happens is their immune system becomes sensitized to a certain protein that is present in a lot of meat. It's called alpha-gal. And that means any time from that moment forward when they ingest meat that contains alpha-gal, their immune system will react to that as if it were an invader. Allergies are an odd thing. You can become allergic to anything at any time. I'm allergic to latex. When I was your age up through my PhD, I wore latex gloves every single day for hours at a time. First couple of years of being a professor, I had no problem with them. Then one day, boom, I have hives right along here and right along here, which is where the boundaries of those gloves were. Then I started getting hives in other places. Went to a dermatologist, and he said, "You have a latex allergy." And I said, "Well, I guess I'm sensitized after years of working in a lab." He said, "Probably so." Didn't cause me a problem for years. Now, I can't even touch anything. If I put it on for one of our lab periods, by the time I walk out, I'll have hives there. Yes, ma'am.
That can happen with like food too, right?
Yes, it can happen with food. It can happen with chemicals in the environment. It can happen to pretty much any substance at any time. People don't realize how fine-tuned the immune system is. We want it to be robust and kick out invaders, don't we? Because nobody likes being sick. But you don't want it to go crazy and start attacking harmless things. It's even possible to become immune to yourself. Did you know that? This is called an autoimmune disorder. An autoimmune disorder. Auto means self. For whatever reason, your immune system starts recognizing your own healthy tissues as foreign invaders. My ex-wife had lupus. And let me tell you, it is one of the most brutal diseases I have ever seen anybody have to live with. And in the later years of our relationship, she developed many, many more autoimmune disorders. Sjogren's syndrome, celiac, lymphocytic colitis. She had the rheumatoid arthritis. And finally, fibromyalgia. And she ended up, the last 2 years we were married, she just not only quit working, she quit doing anything, essentially. She gave up on life. It's a pretty brutal process. She had to take some pretty brutal drugs. By the time the rheumatoid arthritis showed up, they were actually prescribing her methotrexate which is a chemotherapy agent, which, as I told you when we talked about cancer, is essentially a toxin killing cells. And you can imagine all of the side effects that went with it. Yes, ma'am?
Do they know why her body started doing that?
Nope, not a clue.
Did anybody else in her family have stuff like that, or was it just her?
Just her. She has 2 sisters, both her parents, all alive. None of them ever had any issues. Trust me, I did a lot of reading on this. Yes, ma'am.
Is there like healthier ways to like help it instead of like?
Not really. Part of the problem is we have so many chemicals in our environment today, we don't really know what's out there, what danger it's causing, and so forth. Like lead. Lead used to be in paint. I'm sure you've heard of that, right? How many of you have ever heard of leaded gasoline? One person. They used to add tetraethyl lead to gasoline as an anti-knocking agent. And if you look at the rise in violent crime in the United States, it actually very nicely coincides with the amount of environmental lead pollution produced by gasoline. Because lead inhibits the development of the nervous system. And if you look at when they eliminated lead in gasoline, about 10 years after that is the peak of violent crime, and then it starts to fall off. Does that mean environmental lead caused a wave of violent crime? Not necessarily. But the evidence, or at least the coincidence of it, is very compelling.
When did they eliminate it from gasoline?
Let me see. Leaded gasoline for on-road vehicles was completely banned in the United States on January 1st, 1996. The phase-out began in 1973 due to health concerns. The final restriction meant it could no longer be sold for car engines. The last global stockpile was used in Algeria in 2021. I could still buy some, though. Y'all don't believe me? You look horrified. Most people don't realize that it is still used in avgas, aviation gasoline. So if you have a prop-powered plane, you can get 100-octane gas that is low lead, but it still has some lead. And they're trying to phase that out.
Okay, so it's just a question. I've seen where meningitis is going around a lot. If you've already had it once, can your body like build an immunity to it, or like
What disease?
meningitis?
Yes, it depends on whether it's viral or bacterial. Viral meningitis, actually, believe it or not, is not as bad as bacterial meningitis. Bacterial meningitis, by the time it becomes symptomatic, it's a very, very iffy case of whether or not you'll survive. And there are vaccines for it. They actually recommend people your age get it if you live in crowded conditions. College dormitories are a noted place where you get outbreaks of this. When I was in graduate school at Vanderbilt, there was a young lady who was at David Lipscomb University, a Christian university there in Nashville, and she got it and ended up losing her legs because of it. The infection gets so bad, essentially all of your blood vessels in the extremities constrict to keep blood flowing through your core to try to eliminate it, and essentially she got necrosis in her legs and they had to amputate them. And she was the starting center on the basketball team. But that's the whole idea behind vaccination. You inject either what they call an attenuated organism. Attenuated means that it's still alive, but it's no longer infectious, or a dead critter, because it still has the proteins on the surface. those proteins circulate, your body makes immune antibodies against those, and you maintain those for the rest of your life. So if you get infected again, immediately your body responds to it. It's like chicken pox. I had chicken pox when I was a baby, so I'm immune to it. There's a vaccine now, and they urge everybody to get the vaccine because once you have it, the virus lingers in your nerves for decades. And if you get that virus reactivated at an elderly age, you get shingles. I used to assign my students an exercise where, this is when I taught ecology. When we talked about population ecology, I would have them go to the historic cemetery that was across the street, and they had to select 100 graves at random and figure out the age at which everybody died. It was an age cohort study. And they were always astounded by the number of dead children compared to adults. And that always led us to a discussion. What was the issue? And that was before vaccines. Good question. Any others? Yes?
With the different kinds of vaccines, like whether it's like still alive but not infectious and dead, is there a difference in like how effective it is, or is it like kind of cool?
I'm not an expert on that, but I don't really think it's so much whether or not there is one that's more efficacious than the other as to what the potential side effects are. As I tell everybody, there's side effects to everything. Could you get a vaccine and get a very bad reaction? Absolutely. It could kill you. It happens. But I could also wreck my car going home this afternoon, couldn't I? I hope I don't. I make that trip a lot. I've only had one wreck, and that was when somebody pulled out in front of me. That's why I have a little SUV instead of a truck. I think I told you all that story, didn't I? When my mom got up there with my uncle and aunt, she immediately burst into tears when she saw how bad the truck was damaged because she was worried about me. And then I proved to her that I was unhurt at all. I didn't even have a bruise. Why? Because I happen to have a habit of buckling my seatbelt. Most of the time, I've never needed it. That one time, I was glad I had the habit. It's a good question, though. A lot of people are worried about the COVID vaccine because it's what they call a messenger RNA vaccine. They've gotten away from actually injecting the organism itself and more into injecting proteins or pieces of proteins. And with the messenger RNA virus, what they did was they came up with a more efficient way. Instead of injecting the protein, they actually just inject the messenger RNA. Your body makes a copy of the protein, initiates an immune response, and then the messenger RNA degrades, and you don't have any worries about it. Pretty wild, isn't it? Yes?
It's another meningitis question. My social media is freaking me out, okay? I saw that it's going like really, really bad in like Australia, I think, or somewhere in that area. Somewhere in there. Another country. Could it get spread here?
Sure. We're far, far more danger today because if I wanted to jump on a plane and fly to Sydney or Melbourne, I could be there in about 24 hours max. It took Christopher Columbus, 3 months to sail across the Atlantic? I could be in London by tomorrow morning.
I just saw where they're talking about like another COVID type shutdown for them, and that they're going to bring back the meningitis B vaccination. I don't think I've had it. I'll be honest with you. 'Cause
Ask your doctor. That's the best thing to do.
Wouldn't it be, because you said it's mostly the bacterial, it's most deadly, wouldn't that be the one they have to watch for the most?
Probably so. I don't know what's on social media. Number one, don't ever, ever, ever trust anything you read on the internet. Or AI, for that matter. I was looking up something on AI last night, and I kept trying to get the right answer because I knew enough about the subject to know that what the AI was giving me was the wrong answer. I was looking for the Mark II. I explicitly said the Mark II, and it kept giving me results for the Mark I. Well, I happen to know the specs between the two are very different. What it's telling me for the Mark I will not work on the Mark II. I know that for a fact. But it couldn't give me the correct answer. AI is basically no better than the information that goes in. My suggestion, honestly, would be to not worry about it. The next time you see your doctor, if it is still a concern, I would mention it and say, what are the vaccines you recommend? That's what my doctor does for me. He tells me what ones he recommends and then why, because I like to know. There's been a couple he's told me, he said, I don't think you need them. And I ask him why. He tells me, your age, your living circumstances, there's no point in you suffering something you don't need to. I can live with that. Good question, though. And I don't mind y'all asking them because I want you to feel free to ask anything that we're talking about that has relevance to your life. I'd rather you get the straight information than get some weird, wild something, because I don't have an agenda. I just like to teach. Anybody else? Okay, where were we? Let me get off on these rabbit paths.
Autoimmune disorder.
Do what?
Autoimmune disorder.
Autoimmune disorders. So we covered natural selection, right? What is artificial selection? Artificial selection is when humans, rather than the environment, are the selecting agent. A bear with thicker fur has a better chance of surviving in the Arctic than one with thinner fur, right? That's the environment. That's natural selection. Humans decide we like that nice white fur, so we breed them in a zoo to have white fur, but not whether or not it's thick or thin. You see what I'm saying? You release an albino bear into the woods around here, it's probably not going to do as well because that's not been selected for by nature, has it? But people like fuzzy, cuddly little worm things, so they're going to be very happy with taking pictures of that in the woods. Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that kind of what they do with dogs, like the different breeds?
Oh, absolutely. Every single breed of dog we have is so inbred, they're basically just walking genetic time bombs. Less genetic diversity in any two dogs on the planet than any other species you pick at random. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a Great Pyrenees. How did she get like to the point where she knows like she has to guard animals? Is that just so over time?
There's part of it is instinct. Do you remember when I said every trait in existence has a genetic component? Every trait, including behaviors. We have different tastes, don't we? Is there anybody in here who likes hot peppers? 4 of us, 5 of us. Is there anybody in here who can't stand them? Part of that is a conscious choice or preference. Part of that is genetic. Pain thresholds. I'm fortunate to have a very high pain threshold. Y'all see how I sit, don't you? Y'all ever wondered about that? Why is it I sit at this angle? Well, I've told you, my lowest 2 vertebrae have fused, right? So where you've got 2 bones with a disc between them, I've just got a massive lump of bone. And by this time of the day, if I'm sitting straight up, all of the mass of my torso, arms, and head are coming down on a spot on my backbone about the size of a quarter. So yeah, I sit at this odd angle. That's environmental, isn't it? But I also live in pain. Right now, just if I sit up like that and I think about it, I just let myself consciously be aware of how much I'm hurting. I'm at about a pain level of 6.5 to 7. But I normally live with that. Some people, they get a paper cut, they cry. other people live with way worse pain than I do. It's genetic has and environment and the interaction between them. Alcoholism, you know, that sometimes runs in families, right? Unfortunately, my wife's family was one of them. My wife never had a drinking problem, ever. Any idea why?
She chose not to follow that path.
She chose not to drink. I think we had been married almost 8 years before I even had a glass of wine in front of her. Just because she wasn't tempted. Her sister, on the other hand, her older sister, was, and as far as I know, still is a functional alcoholic. She drank a bottle of wine a day. Yeah, it's kind of scary. Good question, though. Any others? So artificial selection means humans determine what is valued. If we want a trait and an animal has it, we breed for that trait. If an animal has a trait we don't want, we typically will breed it out. It's not nature, it's humans. There are a lot of animals and plants that have been altered by human activity. I always love when you'll see somebody having an emotional reaction to genetically modified organisms. Well, I'm not going to eat that corn, it's GMO. Dude, corn is so inbred and genetically modified over the last 10,000 years, there's no way it could be considered natural. Corn would die out in one generation without human activity. Did you know that? So don't get too hung up on all this, is what I'm saying. Which brings us to the third evolutionary force, and this is sexual selection. Sexual selection is considered different from natural selection. Although some people actually just consider it to be a specialized form of natural selection. Why is that? Sperm are cheap. Eggs are expensive. The male typically has far less invested in a given reproductive event than the female. It's just a fact, isn't it? So most mating in animals is not random. It is actually determined by the female, which we call female mate choice, or it is determined by male versus male competition. Both of these are forms of sexual selection. The easiest example to see would be probably peacocks and peahens. I think I talked about this last time. The bigger and showier the tail, the more likely the peacock to reproduce. So that is selecting for big showy tails, isn't it? The thing to remember, it is not occurring in isolation. It is not occurring in isolation. And by that, I mean natural selection is also playing a role, isn't it? Peahens want a big, showy tail. A big, showy tail slows down the peacock. It slows down too much, it is becoming dinner for some other bird diving down to grab it. Everybody see how that works? This is called balancing selection. Balancing selection. You have one force, sexual selection, driving for that big showy tail, right? The bigger and showier, the better. You have another force called natural selection, driving it to be much smaller and much less showy so it doesn't stand out against the background and advertise your presence to the hawk circling up, and it doesn't slow you down when the hawk dies on you. And if you look, you will have a very narrow range of peacock size and color. Unless you change the environment. If you remove the predator, sexual selection will drive that tail to such an extreme the peacock almost can't move. The tail weighs as much as the bird. So if you put them in a cage where predators can't get through, I think you see how that goes, don't you? The point I want you to get is sexual selection does not occur in a vacuum. The environment can still play a role even if it's directly in opposition to it. Bigger isn't always better. Faster isn't always better. Stronger isn't always better. Sexual selection handles that too. Did you know that? Y'all want an example? Bighorn sheep. I told you about them last time, right? Got those massive horns and they get out there and they butt heads. So one of them gets a cracked skull and dies or gets knocked out. Well, what happens while they're out there butting heads? The female's over here waiting. Sneaky Pete comes along, takes advantage of the scenario, and he gets the job done before the males are done butting heads. They are maladaptive evolutionary dead ends. Sneaky Pete's genes are the ones that get passed on. See how this goes, right? Female mate choice and male-male competition. Those are the two types of sexual selection. If I ask you on the next exam to give me an example, all you'd have to say is peacocks and peahens. That is female mate choice, right? Bighorn sheep, that's male-male competition. And you don't have to go any more detail than that. I just want to see that you understand it. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about the artificial selection.
Sure.
So from where I show dairy cows, we pick out a bull to breed a cow with and we artificially inseminate. If that's a question on what it is, can I talk about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because that is artificial selection. If you have a dairy farm, you're going to breed for milk production, aren't you? If it's a beef farm, you're going to breed for more beef per animal. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want you to feel like you're limited by that. That's one of the reasons I give the test the way I can, so you can always answer it your way. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, next up we have immigration. Immigration with an I means it's coming in. I know, it's boring. No, it's not. I love it. So I got a PhD in it. Immigration with an E means it's going out. This is very often related to another phenomenon called genetic drift that you're going to see why in a minute. But the one that I want you to know is something called genetic swamping. Genetic swamping. Y'all never heard of this, have you? Does anybody know what the wild relative of the chicken is? Or where it originated?
Is it gross?
Is it what?
Gross?
Nope.
I've heard dinosaurs.
Well, dinosaurs, chickens are the closest living relative to dinosaurs. But no, it is something called the red jungle fowl, which is native to India and Southeast Asia. Looks like just a proud rooster, doesn't it? These things are vicious. And I do mean vicious. They will attack animals much, much larger than they are, and they will not stop until their flock is safe. You ever heard the term cockfights? Fighting gamecocks? It's not just a metaphor or a euphemism or the mascot for the University of South Carolina. They are essentially these guys that have been bred for aggression. They put blades on those spurs. Take a look at those spurs right there. Type in red jungle fowl, the very first picture you see. They actually put blades on those, and they can tear out a person's throat. That's not what you keep in your barnyard, is it? The point I'm making, we don't want aggression in our egg-laying hens, do we? We don't want aggression in our roasting birds, do we? We want lots and lots of meat. So essentially, chickens have been bred over thousands of years to be bigger, slower, and far, far, far less aggressive. So let's go back to the red jungle fowl. The red jungle fowl is in danger of becoming extinct. There are two reasons for this. Number one is loss and fragmentation of habitat. With a name like jungle fowl, you can imagine it needs jungle to live, right? Or at least rainforest. I said it's native to India. Does anybody know what the population of India is?
About 1.4 billion.
Yep. The most populous nation on this planet. And those people gotta live somewhere, don't they? So you better believe they are chopping down the jungle. The second reason is also related to the population. One of the cheapest sources of meat and therefore protein is the chicken. You can pretty much keep a flock of chickens just about anywhere. They give you eggs, they give you meat, they don't cost a lot, they've got a short generation time. You see where I'm going with this, right? Now imagine if every one of the 1.4 billion people in India has 2 chickens. That is 2.8 billion chickens in just one country. You see where I'm going with this? Essentially, they're the domesticated version of the red jungle fowl, right? You bet they can breed with the red jungle fowl? Yes, they can. So if you are a male red jungle fowl, what is your most likely mate going to be? A wild female red jungle fowl? Probably going to be a domesticated chicken, just simply because there's more of them. See how this is working? This is called genetic swamping. The wild jungle fowl represent a glass this big. The domesticated chickens represent my coffee cup. If I had this full of water and this full of coffee, and I poured the little shot into my coffee cup, I probably am not even going to be able to taste the coffee, am I? Because it's going to be diluted so much. You've heard of a boat getting swamped? You get a wave big enough, it just overflows, and it puts so much water in the boat that it can't stay afloat. Same thing, except with genes. That is a result of too much immigration with an I. too much of an outside source coming in. The reverse of this is genetic loss. Genetic loss. Specifically, the loss of diversity. If you only have one set of alleles in your gene pool, that's the only set you have, isn't it? Let's say that I kicked one person out per class session. We're a little past midterm, that'd be about half the class would be gone now, wouldn't it? See where I'm going with this? Once they're gone, they're gone. Make sure you get that down. Anytime you lose genetic diversity, you are decreasing your odds of survival. Anytime you lose genetic diversity, you are severely decreasing your odds of survival. We call this whole evolutionary force gene flow. Gene flow. Gene flow is generally not as common or as powerful as natural selection, but it can play a significant role. Which brings us to a rare form of this called introgression. Introgression. Introgression is where you introduce foreign DNA from a related but distinct species. You actually bring in DNA from a different species. Would you all like an example? The American chestnut and the Chinese chestnut, essentially located on opposite sides of the planet, right? The American chestnut was such a common tree that it basically meant 1 out of every 4 trees in the eastern U.S., including where we live here, was a chestnut. 25% of the entire forest was made up of this one species. It's pretty wild, isn't it? I don't have to tell you that the chestnuts are quite tasty. They were a very, very important source of food for settlers, natives, wild animals, you name it. The wood is outstanding. You can't really buy it on the open market anymore. My father was one heck of a woodworker. He was very talented. He had help, whether it was willing or not, me and my brother. So we learned about carpentry, whether we wanted to or not. One of the things he did was in the mid-'80s, we got asked to help a certain older man tear down his barn. My father, being the good neighbor he is, gladly volunteered his 2 sons as well as himself for the exercise. And of course, being the good neighbor, he insisted that he not get paid for it, But if the old man didn't mind, Dad would gladly take some of this old wood from the barn because he could use that in his shop. Well, he got several hundred board feet of chestnut. Like I said, you can't buy it today. When I graduated my PhD, Dad actually made a frame for my diploma out of that. I don't have it hanging in my office because I realized the frame is probably worth as much as the degree because it's chestnut. That's how expensive it is. So you get the idea. Wood and food. Those are the two things. The Chinese chestnut isn't as tasty, doesn't have as much yield, and the wood is not as good quality. However, the Chinese chestnut is essentially immune or at least resistant to the chestnut blight. The chestnut blight got brought over around the turn of the 20th century from China. It was contaminated wood. It came into New York. It began to spread. By the 1930s, it was killing millions, hundreds of millions of chestnut trees. By the 1950s, the American chestnut was functionally extinct. Notice I said functionally extinct. It's not completely gone yet. I have done work on the chestnut. I actually got DNA from it and spent time dealing with it. You get an idea here. I have seen this many American chestnut trees in my life. And one of those was in a botanical garden. I know somebody who knows where one is, a sixth one. He brought me in a sample, but I didn't actually go see it. Now think about this. I grew up in the woods. I played in the woods. I've been trained in the Southeast. I've never really done much field work outside of the Southeast, and that's all I've seen. My sister-in-law just retired this past year as the head forester of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and she and I would go out, and that's how many I've seen. So you see what I mean when I say functionally extinct, right? Well, we've got the American Chestnut Foundation is trying to bring it back. They wanted the blight resistance from the Chinese chestnut, but they want the taste and yield of the American chestnut and the wood from the American chestnut. So what they did was they actually bred the Chinese chestnut to the American. Then they took the hybrid offspring and they bred it back to the American. Then they took the offspring of that, and guess what they bred it back to? Full-blooded American. They now have a chestnut that is 15/16 American. And it appears to be resistant. They are actually doing some larger scale test plantings the last I looked at it. Is that a good example of introgression? Yes, it is, because we have brought in foreign DNA from a different species halfway around the world, but we get a benefit from it. Is that truly immigration or is that artificial selection? A little of both. See how all this overlaps? So the dangers are getting too much foreign DNA, genetic swamping, or having too little variation in your own population because of loss of members. That effectively leads to inbreeding, which means something comes along like the potato famine in Ireland and you're gone. Everybody with me? So what's next? The last one is a force we call genetic drift. Genetic drift. And drift is a very interesting phenomenon. If you look at the last assumption, I believe we said it was an infinitely large population, right? Well, if you've got an infinitely large population and you have truly random mating, inbreeding is not going to be a concern, is it? Every single time you outbreed, it is going to be outbreeding. True or false, every human on this planet has a little bit of inbreeding. I see 3 people nodding, 4 people. It's not nearly like what you say. You may think it's not brother, sister, first cousins, or something like that. It's a phenomenon we call pedigree collapse. Pedigree collapse. How many grandparents do you have? How many great-grandparents you got? How many great-great-grandparents you got? 16. You see where I'm going with this? After 50 generations, which will take us back to the Middle Ages, you have over 1 billion different ancestors. 1 billion. That's greater than the population of the planet Earth during the Middle Ages. So what that means is that constantly bifurcating tree will have overlapped at some point. They say, oh, well, I'm descended from kings. Charlemagne was my ancestor. If you've got any European ancestry at all, Charlemagne was probably your ancestor. Guy lived in the 800s. Genghis Khan fathered thousands and millions of children. If you have any Asian ancestry, you're probably related to Genghis Khan because he probably was one of your ancestors. You see how this works? So when we talk about pedigree collapse, that's what we mean. You had a question, Reagan?
Yeah, I was wondering why inbreeding was so bad, like back in the day, like with King Tut and all that, and it just progressively got better. I just didn't know.
It's called inbreeding depression. And yes, you do need to know that, so get it down. Inbreeding depression. Does anybody here have a purebred dog? What do you got?
Labrador.
Labrador. Does it have any health issues?
No.
Tell us some.
Extremely overweight.
Obesity?
Long legs. Her hips.
Hip dysplasia, very common. That is because any breed of dog that you pick is so inbred that essentially they are homozygous at every gene. They're homozygous at almost every gene. If you got a purebred and a purebred, what's the offspring going to be? Purebred. Imagine that. Well, it means you essentially have no genetic diversity. Now remember, if it's a dominant trait, one allele is sufficient, right? If it's a recessive, how many copies do you have to have? But if you're homozygous for almost every gene, are you more likely to have 2 recessives? Because your only options are dominant homozygous or recessive homozygous. You don't have any heterozygotes because you bred them out. And so most of those bad traits are recessive. This is called recessive unmasking. Recessive unmasking. Essentially, inbreeding depression means that close relatives that breed will have lower fertility. It does not mean that you will automatically die if you are inbred. What it does mean is that you are far more likely to have some bad traits that do not enhance your survival. Y'all want a real life example? Anybody in here familiar with King Tutankhamun? King Tut?
Oh, yeah.
King Tut was the product of about 4 or 5 generations of inbreeding. His parents were siblings. Y'all want to hear what he suffered from? A weakened immune system, a club foot on his left foot, Kohler's bone disease, which means the bone breaks down the more it's worn. Guy couldn't walk without a cane. Didn't know that, did you? Scoliosis, curvature of the spine. He was essentially a hunchback. A cleft palate. He also was married to his full-blood sister. Did you know that King Tut actually had somebody buried in the tomb with him? His 2 stillborn daughters. They did not get carried to term. I think one of them was 4 months and the other one was something like 6 months. Why did they not get carried to term? Because they did not develop sufficiently to do so. Why did they not develop sufficiently to do so? Because they were so inbred. Yes, ma'am.
What did they think was wrong with him? Because they didn't have like all this genetic stuff and the information that we had.
They didn't know. He died when he was 19.
Why was it so normalized back then? Why was it so normalized to just like keep
Purity.
it?
We can't be mixing the royal bloodline with the unwashed, filthy commoners now. Tut tut. Keep it in the family, concentrate power. Y'all ever heard of the Habsburgs? The Habsburgs? The Habsburgs were a royal dynasty that ruled the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were also so inbred that the very last one of them was non-fertile. He couldn't have kids. He was so inbred that it didn't matter who he bred to by that point. So the Habsburg dynasty died out. What you see there is the famous Habsburg jaw. Noticed again I said royal family. Why was it so normalized? Another example, the Blue People of Kentucky, the Fugate family. And this isn't a case of siblings marrying, so, I'm not trying to make a punchline here. But think about how difficult it was to travel 50 years ago, 60 years ago. In my childhood, if we wanted to come to the big city, we had 2 choices. A 2.5-hour drive to Knoxville, Tennessee, or about an 1.5-hour drive to Somerset. This was the big city. And that's in my lifetime. I still remember when they opened State Highway 63, which takes us to I-75 down in Tennessee, and made it open. Now it's no big deal. You want to go to Knoxville, jump the car, boom, there in an hour. You go where you want. But I also remember what it was like driving on old State Highway 63 through there. Anybody here ever have the privilege of driving across Old 92? That was how I got to Williamsburg. And I remember when you started going up that mountain at the very top, there was one spot where you could pass something. And almost every single time I got behind a coal truck. I could make it to Williamsburg from my house now in 45 minutes, probably 40. I think the fastest I ever made that trip when I was in college was about 55 minutes. I remember I was cutting corners. I was opening it up on the straightaway. My brother couldn't drive his Mustang, and it got fixed, and he had my car. So, I couldn't be without a car, could I? So I got to drive his Mustang. The last time I got to drive a Mustang. But honestly, if you got a spouse from that point in time, say 100, 150 years ago, where would you go? You'd be limited to your localized community, wouldn't you? Burnside used to be a real journey from Somerset. I'm talking downtown Somerset to downtown Burnside. It was a self-contained community. Whitley City, Stearns, Pine Knot. I remember when those actually had their own little grocery store, post office, bank, each one. They don't now because the highway has opened everything up. But that's within my lifetime. So back then, chances were you were going to be related to your potential spouse. Now, maybe third, fourth, or fifth cousin, something like that. You see where I'm going with this, though. That's still inbreeding, isn't it? It's a limited pool to pick from. Does that answer your question sufficiently? All of this results from one thing, and that is a small, effective population. A small, effective breeding population. Now, what is an effective breeding population? Those that are capable of breeding. Most of you all are in prime reproductive age. I'm still within that window, but my fertility is definitely lower than any male in this room. It's just a fact of age. A woman my age most likely has gone into menopause and is no longer fertile or capable of bearing children. There are exceptions, but they're rare enough that they are exceptions. You see where I'm going with this? So the smaller the effective breeding population, the more likely you are to see either recessive unmasking or inbreeding depression or both. Do I need to repeat that so you can get it down? The smaller the effective breeding population, the more likely you are to experience recessive unmasking, inbreeding depression, or both. Recessive unmasking, that just means you're going to exhibit recessive traits that make you less likely to survive. Inbreeding depression just means you have a lower fertility and eventually you're not going to be able to have kids. Like King Tut. He and his wife, if he had survived and they kept trying, probably wouldn't have mattered. They're probably so inbred, I doubt they could have had normal offspring that could live all the way to be born, actually. Y'all didn't get taught this in history, did you? Y'all like it when I throw stuff like that in, make some relevance? That's why I like biology, because when you get down to it, it does play a role in who and how we became who and how we are today. It doesn't mean you're limited by your genes. I want everybody to understand that. I think when we started talking about genetics, I think I told you all that your genes represent your potential, right? The environment is what determines that potential. So make sure you have that down in your notes somewhere that you understand it. Whatever else I may want to say about my ex-wife, I have got to give her a lot of credit because she knew exactly what the outcome would be if she started drinking, so she never did. She had the potential. We both knew it was there. When she developed celiac disease, I actually went on a gluten-free diet with her because it made it a lot easier. We only had to buy one set of groceries. She never had to worry about contamination. Now, I won't lie, I cheated. You know my love of the bacon hitter, right? I think I've alluded to that more than one time. Well, as she said, what you do on the road, I don't need to know about. And there was a Wendy's on the way to and from the university, so I won't lie. I did the drive-through more than once. Looks like we're out of time. So thank you all for your attention